Okay, so let's continue on with our journey into understanding why herbs. Herbs have over millennia been used by all sorts of culture to not only improve someone's health and their animal's health, but also just in normal culinary uses. And I think that there is a misunderstanding in our modern world that herbs are either just medicinal or even no medicine attached to it, or just culinary. The truth of the matter is you can't separate culinary herbs from their medicinal value, just as you can't really separate your medicinal herbs from their culinary value. So how do we utilise herbs in our diet on a day-to-day basis to help prevent some of these more insidious diseases that we're seeing now, particularly metabolic and endocrine issues? The other big issue that we see a lot of course, and I think you're probably familiar with, a lot of the hype about the microbiome or the microbiota, which is the gut microbes. And once we talk about that in greater detail, I'd like to really expand on the idea of that, because herbs and all of the ways that we use herbs in our diet can really help to support our gut microbiome as well. Okay, so now I want to talk about how we can use herbs, for example, in the case of horses that might have metabolic syndrome or metabolic kinds of related conditions. It's actually quite easy to understand how this has come about because of the misinformation that a lot of people have with feeding. They're not aware of a lot of the complications that occur with general feeding and overfeeding. This is often associated with gut health issues as well, and of course with the introduction of chemicals to deal with weeds, etc., you do have other complications when we're talking about the destruction of our natural biodiversity of the world that we live in. So one of the main aims that I have as a practitioner, and what I talk about with my clients on a day-to-day basis when we're working with an individual case, is to make sure that we aren't necessarily becoming an organic maniac. That's obviously too hard, but what we do need to do is to make sure that we're not adding more complications than we need to. So eliminating processed food is one of the things. So moving to a whole food diet is one of the primary directives that I try to suggest to people. Using products, which I'll try not to be too brand focused, but I do like some particular products in our whole food diet. For example, there is a product called Speedy Beet, which I do recommend to a lot of owners because of its high fibre, low GI component, and it also adds value in terms of creating a great prebiotic effect in the digestive system. Once you've got a high level of fibre in the gut, it's very easy to add small elements of and diverse forage. For example, if you've got a pasture that is a naturally diverse pasture with native low GI types of grasses, then that horse has got a great natural environment within which to grow and thrive. And it is, by the way, about thriving. Depending on the circumstances, and I think this is the main situation that I like to understand on a case-by-case basis, where you are, what the type of pasture you're in, what your horse needs in terms of general nutrition, because it is important for you to also understand what is happening in the pasture itself. Is there deficiencies there? I would rather that you worked on the pasture and allowed that pasture to become the food for your horse, rather than just adding a random supplement. Random supplements aren't necessarily going to be addressing everything that your horse needs, and in some cases may be problematic, especially if you are feeding a multitude of different feeds that all have special additives added into them. So you can get complications by doing that. So my approach is always about simplifying. The simpler the better. The higher the forage, the better. The less sugar, the better. And the more whole food, the better. Within that particular feed base, you can then make some very nice adjustments if you need to for very specific things. And as a herbalist, herbs do have very specific properties that we can actually influence the way the body is working. And I think that's a misunderstood concept of particularly our herbal medicine. The idea that you need to feed an enormous amount of something to get a blood reading, to get a therapeutic result, that's a very medicinal and, dare I say, a more modern way of understanding herbal medicine. The herbal approach that we have is based on the Dorothy Hall system. We work on what we call trigger doses and using very small doses of a particular formula. Formulas are put together and they're called galenical preparations. And within those formulas, you have very small amount of herb. So there is no risk of overdosing. There's no risk of having what we call a therapeutic level of a substance in the blood. So therefore, for those people who are worried about swabbing, for example, it's just not a possibility if you understand what you're trying to achieve within a formula. And so on a one-to-one basis, we can actually get together and create a plan for your horse or for yourself or your dog to get the health outcome that you're actually looking for.